Right, so today we are stepping into some of the absolute darkest corners of human history. We're embarking on a descent into a secret so closely guarded and a reality so horrific that it honestly almost defies comprehension. This isn't just another war story, you know? It's a terrifying look at what actually happens when science completely loses its moral compass. We are talking about Unit 731. And look, if you haven't heard of it, well, that is entirely by design. The atrocities committed here were deliberately swept under the rug by the exact people who were supposed to be delivering justice. So let's just dive right into this explainer and uncover the incredibly dark legacy of a place that history tried its very best to erase. Now, the Imperial Japanese Army went to absolute extreme lengths to hide this facility during World War II. Officially, on paper, it was an epidemic prevention and water purification plant, or even more simply, a lumber mill. Innocent, right? Helpful even. But the true purpose was actually a covert biological weapons facility and a secret killing factory located in Pingfan over in occupied China. And what's truly deeply disturbing here is the sheer scale of the deception. We are talking about a massive facility with over 150 buildings, and yet the neighbors, the literal residents living right outside the gates, had absolutely no clue that unimaginable human experiments were happening right next door. They honestly thought it was just a lumber mill processing wood. And as we're going to see, that specific lie about processing wood played a really dark psychological role inside the gates. So there's this Japanese word, Maruta. It translates to logs. And this is exactly how the doctors, the scientists, and the guards referred to the prisoners trapped inside Unit 731. They were never called patients, they weren't even called prisoners of war, they literally weren't even seen as human beings, they were just logs. By forcing everyone to use this specific term, the facility effectively stripped away all human identity from the victims, who, by the way, were Chinese, Russian, and Allied prisoners, and yes, that included women and children. The really crucial takeaway here is how this linguistic horror actually allowed brilliant medical doctors to commit the most depraved atrocities imaginable without feeling an ounce of guilt. Because think about it, if you change the word, you completely change the psychology. You're no longer torturing a person, you're just processing a log. To put that into perspective, imagine an inspector or a colleague asking a guard how many human beings had died in the facility that day. The guard wouldn't give a casualty number. The standard, chilling response was simply, "We chopped 3 logs today." Just let that sink in for a second. We chopped 3 logs today. That was the absolute total value of human life inside Unit 731. To truly wrap our heads around this horror, we really have to look past the statistics and focus on the individuals. There is this deeply human, profoundly tragic anecdote from the 1940s involving a medical technician named Nata Ishibashi. So 2 young prisoners were being held in what the guards, again, cruelly called the log cabin. One was a 21-year-old Chinese girl and the other was a 19-year-old Ukrainian girl. They managed to approach Ishibashi and essentially begged him for a mirror. Remember, they had been subjected to weeks of malnutrition, horrific disease, violence, just constant fear. And their request was so painfully simple. They just wanted to see their own faces one last time, just to know if they could even still recognize themselves. These 2 young women risk unimaginable torture just to assert their own humanity, just to take that profoundly human action of looking in a mirror before the end. And, moved by their plea, Ishibashi actually did it. He meticulously snuck a mirror through a hole in their cell door. Well, 40 years after that encounter, Nata Ishibashi gave a haunting public testimony. He said, "I gave them that mirror, but I couldn't save them. Later, I learned that both of them had been vivisected." He explained to the world that they had been used for experiments and died on the operating table. They were literally cut open while they were still fully alive. Their names were ripped away from them the second they entered the facility, replaced by 3-digit numbers, and then their lives were discarded in the most agonizing way you could possibly imagine. That was the fate of 2 girls who just wanted to see their own reflections. Okay, so this brings us to the guy running the whole operation, General Shiro Ishii, and the totally twisted logic of his quote-unquote pure science. Look, Ishii was a brilliant doctor for sure, but he was an absolute monster. He ordered vivisections, meaning surgeries and organ removals, on fully conscious patients without any anesthesia. And why? Because he firmly believed that numbing a patient would, in his words, alter the data. He wanted to observe the pure, unadulterated reaction of the human body to extreme trauma. They did frostbite testing in -30°C winters, literally freezing prisoners' limbs and hitting them with sticks until they sounded like solid wood, just to test out different ways to defrost them. They tied humans to stakes in concentric circles to test the exact lethal range of grenades, flamethrowers, and chemical bombs. This literally illustrates, in the most macabre way possible, what happens when the pursuit of knowledge is totally divorced from any sense of morality.
And you know, this wasn't even just confined to the laboratories. This pure science was taken out and deployed into the real world as a weapon of mass destruction. We have this 1940 report from the Chinese Medical Journal that details a specific attack where Japanese planes flew over the city of Ningpo and just dropped plague-infected fleas. They scattered wheat and grain all over the city to attract the local rat population, which would then get bitten by the fleas, artificially sparking a devastating outbreak of the bubonic plague. And General Ishii was actually so incredibly proud of this successful biological weapons test that he had a whole documentary film made about it so he could show it off to the Japanese high command. They were actively using unsuspecting civilian populations as human test subjects.
400,000. That is the estimated number of human beings who died as a direct result of Unit 731's operations. Between their horrific lab experiments and their biological warfare attacks across China, 400,000 lives were completely extinguished in the name of twisted data.
Now, you're probably thinking, okay, surely at the end of the war, the people responsible faced the music, right? Well, the timeline reveals a really massive, infuriating betrayal. In 1945, Japan surrenders. The army immediately blows up the Unit 731 facility to burn the evidence, and every single remaining prisoner is executed. In 1946, General Shido Ishii gets arrested and faces investigators at the Tokyo Tribunal. But then, in 1947, we hit the absolute climax of this whole nightmare. The United States government secretly steps in and grants complete, absolute immunity to Shido Ishii and his top scientists. Why in the world would they do that? In exchange for their biological weapons research data. The US was desperate to keep this deadly info out of the hands of the Soviet Union as the Cold War was spinning up, so they explicitly chose weapons data over justice.
And the way they justified it is it's wild. American military communications from the time explicitly stated that they traded this immunity for, quote, data that could not be obtained in our own laboratories because of scruples attached to human experimentation. Think about what they're actually saying there. The U.S. government effectively acknowledged that this data was soaked in the blood of innocent people, obtained through methods so deeply evil that American doctors couldn't replicate them because of their own moral scruples. And yet, they decided the geopolitical advantage was worth more than the lives of 400,000 victims. The United States literally became a co-conspirator in covering up Unit 731.
So, if we break down the aftermath, the profound injustice is just glaring. General Shiro Ishii, the mastermind behind all of this torture, walked away with full immunity, kept his wealth, and died peacefully in his own bed in 1959 at the age of 67. And the scientists working under him, they didn't see the inside of a prison cell either. They went on to live very comfortable lives. A lot of them became highly respected university professors and even presidents of major pharmaceutical companies in Japan. Meanwhile, the victims were completely denied justice. Their stories were silenced, and their unimaginable suffering was just deliberately forgotten by the world for decades. The monsters lived in comfort, and the victims were erased.
But if you thought we hit rock bottom, there is one final, devastating twist here: the ultimate insult. When American scientists finally sat down to comb through all those logs and all that data they had traded human justice for, they realized it was largely useless. This supposedly invaluable research gathered by Unit 731 was actually miles behind the United States' own biological research. It provided almost zero scientific significance, which means that tens of thousands of human beings were subjected to the most unthinkable, agonizing ends for absolutely nothing. A known monster was allowed to walk completely free in exchange for information that was virtually worthless.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. It's a heavy philosophical dilemma. Knowing the sheer scale of the horrors of Unit 731, knowing the innocent blood that was spilled just to fill up those research logs, can data obtained through pure evil ever actually be used for good? Or does the very act of using that data inherently make us complicit in the atrocities themselves? Take a moment and really think about that.